For it.
So Layla, I am really curious. Kind of, you had a two-part journey, right? You were diagnosed with ADHD, and then a little bit later, you were diagnosed with autism, ASD. So I guess the first part of my question is, what was going on in your life that kind of led to you looking into ADHD? What were some of the things that where you started connecting on the dots and thinking I should look into this? Because your partner had ADHD too, right?
Ye- yes. So, funny enough, um, I've pretty much joked my whole life that I have ADHD, but I'm also gifted. So that masked a lot of things going on for me. Um, but probably, but I just managed because my gifted kind of outweighed my ADHD. And January 2019, I started my first job right out of grad school as a school counselor. And I was running back in to grab something from the house. And my husband looked at me and he went, Layla, you realize you're ADHD too, right? And I was like, I ain't got time for this conversation. I got to find my keys. Uh, and then part of my job as a counselor is I sit in on a lot of parent meetings where we discuss concerns. And they were talking about all of these little girls with inattentiveness, but still being okay, like academically average.
Mhm.
And I'm like, this is really like familiar, but I wasn't ready to like touch that yet. It was like, I just graduated, new job, let me settle into this. Um, then, of course, the pandemic hit. And right after the pandemic hit, I decided to start a PhD program online for counseling.
Of course.
And that's where my edges started to go whoop, over the edge. Um, and I also got an intern at my job, so I was supervising a school counseling intern. I just added all the things to my plate, and it kind of blew up in my face. So I actually got my diagnosis in December of 2020, 2 days before Christmas Day.
Okay.
Yeah. And I actually didn't get medicated until April of 2021 because I was nervous about it. My family has a history with substances, so I was like, eh. But it came, I'm the type of academic person where I never turned anything late. Would I be doing it 2 hours before it's due? Yes, but never late. And I changed my dissertation type from qualitative to quantitative while I was in the advanced qualitative class, and I did not write that paper for 3 weeks. And that is when I finally decided to get on medication.
Right. So it's interesting because it's funny. I had a similar experience where I got the prescription for the medication, and then it took me a couple weeks to just even go pick it up, and then it sat in my bag, and I just like carried it around my purse for weeks before I even took it because I was really nervous. But I wasn't. I mean, I don't have much of a history of substance abuse beyond alcohol abuse. But so I wasn't really worried about the prescription medication aspect. I was mostly worried that it was sort of going to amp me up. Like I was worried that because a stimulant, right? My stereotype or my misconception about a stimulant was that it was going to make me feel like I was on cocaine, and it was the total opposite. And it is for many of us. But it's funny that you mentioned that you've got a history of substance abuse in your family, and that was what made you hesitant to use the drug. Like, was that something you came up with on your own, or was that something your doctor told you? Because, like, we now realize that
It
is
was
absolute misconception.
it was on my own.
Yeah.
So I realized I didn't go through like a traditional method of getting my ADHD diagnosis. I actually went through ADHD online
Uh huh.
because I understood myself well enough to know that I was not going to make an appointment, try to go see a doctor physically in the midst of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did research online to find a credible site that did the online diagnoses and was like a credible, reputable source. And I found ADHD online. and I was not disappointed. They gave me a 20-page report.
Yeah, I have several family members who have been diagnosed through ADHD online. I'm a big supporter of that company and that website, and I think it's, especially in the middle of a pandemic, it's such a great resource. So, yeah, okay. So anyway, that was a little side tangent about the sort of misconceptions about ADHD medication, as though it is somehow abusing, that you're abusing, or addictive. That's the other thing, is doctors will often talk about how addictive the medication is, and like it's a gateway drug, and it's so, yeah. And then meanwhile, we're all forgetting to take it.
Me and one of my best friends were talking yesterday. She also has ADHD. We kind of just flocked together, right? And we were talking about how we have to set alarms like halfway through the day so we don't forget our midday dose.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it might be addictive for people who don't have ADHD. I was like, but we're lucky if we remember it.
I know, right? Okay, so you got on the medication to finish your paper, and kind of what happened then? What was your experience?
Honestly, it was very fun because it wasn't just from like inside my head. My intern by that point was spending all day, every day with me. So my principal actually looked at her and went, Kirsten, you're the one who has to spend the most time with her. What difference do you see? And it was the most perfect description. She looked at my principal and she went, you could tell that Layla's brain isn't as loud in her head. And it was perfect. Like, because I always have my thoughts going 100 miles an hour, and I could finally pick a thought when I wanted to. And that was life-altering for me, honestly.
I love that description. I can pick a thought when I want to. That's so apt. And it's interesting that somebody else notices, because we always talk about how quiet our brains feel, right? And how it, all of the everything going a million miles a minute just really slows down. But it's interesting that somebody you work with would notice that. It's cool.
Yeah. And like I said, she was literally, like, her and I were in close quarters all day, every day. Like, I was supervising her. She did lessons with me. So that's why my principal looked at her and was like, Kirsten, you tell me. She was like, it's not that I don't trust you, Layla. I need somebody else to tell me.
Now, you had mentioned in your email to me that after getting on the medication was when you realized things were still not adding up, as you said, and then you started to look into autism. Now, you work with kids on the spectrum as well, right? So you, again, like, what was happening that you were sort of like, there's more happening here?
So after, about almost a year on the medication, I realized there were still some things like socially that weren't quite adding up for me. Like, not outwardly, for like other people, but I could tell I was still missing social cues. Not quite getting certain things, misreading certain things, and I absolutely have the sensory issues. Like if something don't feel right on me, I've had teachers, I've stopped mid-lesson, been to a teacher like, hey, can you find the hair and grab it? Because I can't deal with it. Like a stray hair on my shirt. And I was actually doing a certification training for autism. And I came across Jennifer Cook, which she wrote this beautiful book called Autism in Heels. And she wrote a checklist. And so I printed it out, and then I was checking off every single thing. And I cried throughout her book because I just related to it so much. And I was like, this is it. This makes sense. This is my missing piece.
Wow, that's really powerful. And you just remind me of how I had to pull over the other day because there was like a feather in my shirt somewhere, and I had to pull over and like jump out of the car and like rip my shirt off until I could find out where it was. I didn't know what it was at the time. I didn't know if it was a bug or something, but it was like, yeah. Anyway, so Wow. Okay, I actually haven't heard of that book. That's really interesting. I want to look into that. So, now you what's the testing process like once you've already been diagnosed with ADHD? Because sometimes I feel like I interview a lot of women who kind of get it as a package deal, right? Like they get the big diagnostic testing, and you know it's the 4 hour, and you come out with a whole list of all these different learning disorders and learning disability. You're like, turns out I had all these things I didn't know about. But if you kind of, what did that look like for you? That additional testing process?
So I found a local uh, psychiatrist in my area who did testing for adults, which is a lot harder than it sounds. Um, that there's not many who do it, especially not. I'm in southern Louisiana,
Yeah.
so even harder, if I'm being quite honest. And so I ended up finding one where she just came back to Louisiana like 2 years ago. Um, I set up the appointment online, which was my favorite kind of way to set up an appointment. They emailed me paperwork to fill out, and I went in, and it was not like a normal, what people would think of when they think of like of an autism evaluation. Like I told her, she was the most personable and empathetic psychiatrist, psychologist I've ever met. Um, it was like having a conversation. She was gathering all of my like medical history, physical history, social, mental, just all of my histories, but in conversation form. And sure enough, at the end, she, reaffirmed the ADHD. She reaffirmed anxiety because, like most females, I've been diagnosed with anxiety since I was like 12. And she was like, and you absolutely meet the criteria for autism. She was like, I know we don't like this word, but it was her way of like processing it herself. But she was like, if Asperger's was still in the DSM, that's what I would have given you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So, gosh, where do I start? I have so many questions about, well, just about anxiety too, right? Because I'm like, God, it. When I think about all of these symptoms and how they are in childhood, and I think about my own childhood, now I think about my daughter a lot, who's in high school, and kind of what, where she's struggling and I don't know. I question a lot of just sort of like, she is just she is doing really, really well in school, but now I'm also kind of like, at what cost, right? Because she is developing so much anxiety, and I'm like, it's interesting to me in terms of like, what does struggle look like when it's hidden so deep, right? But anyway,
Yeah.
I'm curious, when now with these diagnoses, looking back over the course of your life with this new lens, it's so profound. Um, I got to find a new word. I use that word, I think, every week. But anyway, I don't know what else to call it. That's what it is, right? It's just insane looking back throughout your whole life through this new lens. But like, what are some of the things that come to mind that you were just like, oh, the signs were clearly there all along?
So the first thing I can think of that's like autism related is I was 4 years old. I was in pre-K, and there was this little boy who used to pick on me all the time. Like, it was one of those, honestly, it was part of my routine. I went to pre-K, he picked on me, I got mad about it. Well, one day, he was not picking on me, and I was so confused. My routine was messed up. He wasn't doing what he normally did, so he was like playing on a table and like throwing a pointy toy. So I stuck my head straight in front of the toy, being like, why aren't you picking on me today? And now I have a scar that you can't see in the camera, but I have a scar on my eyebrow from that. But it just missed everything. And that's like my first like look at autism.
Mm-hmm.
But I was actually a hyperactive child. I had a wonderful first grade teacher who actually told my mom to get me evaluated for ADHD. but they just told my mom that I'm gifted and bored.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, y'all were right, but y'all were wrong.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
it's yes and, right?
yeah. It's like, yes, but it was more than that.
Mm.
um, but I was also not what people thought of when they looked at ADHD or autism, because my natural hair color is white blonde. Like, I am about as cotton top as they get. Um, blue eye blonde, tea tiny, white girl in the South. I am not what people thought of. And they were just like, oh, she's just smart. And I think it was a relief for my mom to hear that at that time, because my mom has cerebral palsy. So she already dealt with a lot of stigma and everything through her life. So I think part of her didn't want me to feel that. She wanted to focus on the positive things,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm grateful for, because I think that's why I was able to make it so long without a diagnosis, and without medication. It was when I overloaded my plate that it finally got too much for me. But my mom always supported like my strengths and my abilities, and the whatever wild hair came up, she was like, just do your thing, Layla. I'll still love you.
Wow.
So yeah. So I've always been hyper. I remember in middle school I used to go into what we called La La Land, is what I called it, when I would zone out. I was the type of person who could hyper focus on books for hours on end. I actually bounced between sports until I found karate at the age of 9, and that became one of my high interest areas. And I still do karate to this day. It's one of my favorite things. There are videos of me kicking things in the morning. It makes my day. So I can see the ebb and flow of like hyper focus, but my high interest areas have come to stay, like Harry Potter and books and martial arts and office supplies, and actually my job, school counseling, because I decided I was going to be in psychology when I was 12.
Really?
Yep. And
Wow.
now I'm working on a PhD in counseling.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I've spoken to so many women who are in teaching or doing something sort of social social services related. I think we're so drawn to helping marginalized communities, and it makes perfect sense. When you reached out to me and sort of was talking about a little bit of your background, it's like, yeah, it's got ADHD written all over it.
Right?
It's funny. You also reminded me of a story of when I was in like fifth or sixth grade, and I was being punished by my teacher because I was talking too much, and so I got sent out into the hall. And I remember one time getting sent out into the hallway, and I was really bored, so I started trying to count all of the holes in the ceiling tiles. And then I figured if I could figure out how many holes were in a ceiling tile, then I could count all the ceiling tiles in the entire hallway, and I could figure out exactly how many holes there were in the entire hallway, right? And then she sent a student out to tell me I could come back inside, but I wasn't done counting. So I told the student to tell the teacher I'm not ready to come back inside yet. And then of course she came storming out into the hallway because I was being defiant, and she sent me to the principal's office. And it's like, now through this lens, I'm just like, but I had this thing I was like needed to finish.
Yeah. Me and my intern were talking the other day, and I had sent her a TikTok about something where it's like, if you see a person repeating a number to themselves, do not interrupt them. And she used to deflect all of the people on campus for me, because she knew I'd be like trying to remember something, and she would just answer the questions while I was in hyper focus mode and just be like, let her be, I got this.
That reminds me
So,
of, It kind of reminds me of going to a restaurant where you have to get the code for the bathroom. You know, you go to like Starbucks and they tell you the 18-digit code to get in the bathroom, and I just have to like repeat it over and over and over and over and on my way to the bathroom. Otherwise, I will forget it. Um, yeah, you know. So okay, so that but it's fascinating to me that you knew so early because I sort of felt like that was one of the questions that I always hated, right? Well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, and the only thing I ever wanted to be when I grew up was a secretary, because and like the feminist in me, it was like, really? But now through an ADHD lens, I'm kind of like, no, you know what? That makes sense that you wanted to be a secretary because I love like organizing and I love, you know, like you said, office supplies. And to me, being a secretary was like being in charge of calendars and managing things, and that level of like hyper organization always appealed to me.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah, right. Uh, I get it. Yeah, I love the office supply section of Target. Um,
Yes.
so now I'm curious about working with children. I love that you call them tiny humans too. So how did you get started, or how did you sort of find yourself working with neurodivergent children?
So it kind of just comes as part of the job of being a school counselor.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've known I wanted to be in the like psych field since I was 12, but I also always knew I wanted to work with children. I taught karate to 3 and 4 year olds when I was in high school. Uh, Anything I did, I was pretty much always relating to tiny humans or adolescents. It was never, it was never really me looking at adult populations. Um, and when I got into grad school, I decided to do like the dual track. So it's mental health and school counseling. That was also another ADHD roller coaster where I was like, I'm just going to do mental health. Nah, I'm just going to do school counseling. And I was like, F it. I'm going to do both. I might as well. And this all happened within like a 8 month span. Uh, but I went through my master's, and I did actually all of my internships were in high schools. But when I graduated, it was middle of the school year. So I graduated December of 2018. And it just so happened an elementary position was open. And for me, I was just worried about getting hired. I didn't care where I got hired. I wanted to get hired. Um, and it just so happened I went and I interviewed, uh, and they called me the next day to let me know I got the job. And I was terrified because I was like, how is somebody who is 5 foot even going to work with tiny humans? Like, I can terrify a high schooler with no problem. Little kids are fearless. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Uh, but my co-counselor, because we're a pre-K through 5 school, I have pre-K through 2nd, and my co-counselor, Alicia, has 3rd through 5th. And I could not have asked for a better co-counselor. Um, I could not have asked for, honestly, a better friend either. Um, because she helped make my transition seamless. The things I didn't know about the elementary level, she taught me. But the way I started really learning more about my tiny humans, especially the neurodivergent ones, is they were the ones coming up on my caseload of being referred for small group counseling. They're the kids who get the most discipline referrals, especially our kids with ADHD. I was actually looking at my data last year, and I realized every single suicide assessment I did was on a kid with ADHD. And that's kind of what made me go down my rabbit hole of getting all my certifications, because I have the ADHD certification, I have the autism certification, all of that. And it's just a nature of working in the schools. The kids who get referred to me tend to be the quote-unquote behavior kids, and unfortunately, those tend to be our kids who have a 504 or an IEP for ADHD or autism, which kind of breaks my heart to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I had all these questions and now I just need to pause because it's so heartbreaking. And just thinking about the negative comments and the eye rolling and just how that feeling of just being such a colossal disappointment is something that so many of us felt as children, right? And
Yeah.
it's got to be so heartbreaking to watch that continuing from generation to generation, and knowing that like there's so many levels to how we can need to help, right? Like it's just not just the diagnosis. There's so much more beyond that in terms of like lifting these kids up, right? So anyway, I don't. You should be the one talking. I'm curious. You
You're
mentioned
good.
but you mentioned about you had started an ADHD initiative at your school, which just I love because every time I just love how as soon as we're diagnosed, we're like, okay, how could I advocate? How could I help? How could I save other? It's immediately like so many of us turn into that advocacy role, right? So I'd love to hear more about how you've been educating other faculty and teachers and parents.
So this is like my baby. Like, I'm so proud of this initiative. And I know I've said this, I'm thankful I have an administration where I go to her with my shenanigans. And as long as I have a reasonable rationale, she's like, go for it, Layla. Like, she trusts me. And me and my co-counselor, we were looking at our data, we realized 75% of our 504 plans were for kids with ADHD.
75%. Wow.
75%. And that was out of I think at the time 80. We had 80 kids with plans. So, yeah, at least 60 of them had ADHD on there. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them were, combined ADHD and dyslexia, those kinds of things. But at least 60 of them had ADHD on it. And I had just finished up my certification training, so I had all of this information in front of me, and I'm like, I can make handouts. I can make presentations. I was like, Miss Booer, can I do the thing? I was like, here's the data of why I should do the thing, but can I do the thing? And she's like, Layla, do the thing. So starting in September, every week, they started getting different handouts that I would email out and also print out and put in their boxes, using the information I got from my training. So I talked about executive functioning skills. I talked about different ways to set up their classroom, different types of accommodations. What is a true fidget? What will properly get their attention regulated back onto the right things, kind of thing. I started talking more at 504 meetings about it, helping parents understand it. For parent-teacher conference, I gave a Zoom presentation to parents that wanted to attend. I gave them at 3 different times, both times. So they had different times throughout the day that they could come. And then I also videoed it. So if anybody missed it, I could email it to them. And with it came a handout that had different ADHD resources. Attitude has a really wonderful parent toolkit for it. I attached that. I found some Kangaroo ADHD worksheets. Put that in. Just all kinds of things linked within it that I could send with the presentation. I've actually also presented at my alma mater for my master's program to their counseling clinic on how to become an ADHD-friendly counselor. I've applied for, I did a program proposal for my state conference. That'll be in September. and I'm still waiting to hear back. But same thing, but on a like bigger scale of being an ADHD friendly counselor. So I've just been disseminating all this information in any way I can to them, whether it's through presentations or handouts and real time of showing them, hey, here's what you can do. Or I take them into my office and I show them how my desk is set up and like, you see this? This might help your tiny human right now. Because I was like, I don't even sit on a regular chair. I have a ball chair in my office, for the record.
Oh my God. Well, for me, the litmus test for a teacher is fidgets, like you said. Like if the teacher gives them fidgets because they know it helps them focus and helps them listen or lets them doodle, I'm like, yes, thumbs up, good job. It's the teacher that's like, I take all that stuff away because then they're not paying attention to me. I'm like, you completely missed the mark. You are, no, just hard no.
It's funny you say that because our Thursdays are our parent meeting days. It's not good for the ADHD or the autism. It's long. And all this school year, everything's been via phone conference, which is beautiful. So am I standing in front of a phone with actually, I have one in my pocket. Little bike chain fidgets.
Oh, nice.
I'm standing over a phone with one of these.
Yeah.
Or my infinity cube. And I do not sit until my meetings are done.
That's my favorite. I have one right here. This is my favorite. One of my favorite fidgets.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just want to backtrack because you said a kangaroo.
Yeah.
Thing. What is that?
I think I found it on a site called Teacher Pay Teachers. It's like a giant site for educators, and I just searched like ADHD worksheets. And it's like a set of like kangaroo themed ADHD worksheets.
Oh,
and
okay. So it's just
and I was like
that's the mascot. That kind of makes sense.
Apparently. I don't know. I'm going to be honest in saying that was an impulse buy, and I don't regret it.
I like it. I always think about Winnie the Pooh, right? I'm like, some days I'm Tigger, some days I am Eeyore. I'm like a healthy balance of both.
I wish I could be. I run at like 110 miles all the time.
Really?
Like,
oh no.
I am actually, when I present it to like my alma mater, somebody that I went to middle school and high school with is in their current cohort. As I was giving the presentation, so I called out, I was like, actually, so-and-so has known me for years. It's just like, honestly, Layla, how did they just diagnose you? We all knew. We just thought they decided not to give you medication. Like that's what it seemed like.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, nope. I've been running. So I've always run at this level. I don't crash until I'm asleep. And even then, I'm still moving.
Okay, I have so many questions. Let me start. So, because I just, I'm like, I don't get to sit down with a school counselor very often. So I'm like, the parent in me is like, oh my God, I have so many questions. But I'm curious about, teaching teachers, right? Because the topic, I've spoken a lot on this podcast about, how teachers, why boys are more likely to be diagnosed with than girls is because it's the teachers who are recognizing disruptive behavior, and they're calling the parents, and they're like, your kid has ADHD, get them diagnosed, get them on medication so that they're not as disruptive, grossly, simplifying it, but in a nutshell, right? So how do you teach teachers what to look for in girls if the girl is not really disruptive and often doing very well? Sometimes there's like low level disorganization happening, but a lot of it is so internalized, right? It's just this buildup of anxiety and and internalized pressure, especially like the gifted program. Oh my god, the gifted program is just basically like a mill for ADHD, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So like as a teacher, what do they even look for? Because I also feel like as a parent, I have kind of one of each. I have the boy who is all over the place, really just like so classic ADHD in his need for his he's just so big with his emotions, and he's so everything is intense, and he's just he's very sort of very easy for me to see a lot of the signs. But then I look at my teenage daughter, who is like very sort of closed, and she has she is fairly organized. Like, she doesn't have a lot of the kind of classic symptoms of ADHD, but I see her as she's getting older having so much anxiety around her executive dysfunction, especially when it comes to like planning and the bigger projects, right? It's like now she's getting older, so she's getting bigger projects and longer term projects, and she just cannot manage her time. She's procrastinating like crazy, and so that kind of anxiety is happening. So anyway, just to backtrack, like, how do you teach teachers what to look for if it's not the sort of stereotypical signs?
So one of the first things that like we talk about is like we tell them look for the daydreamers. Who's the one? We call it the butterfly effect at my school, honestly, where we know parents are used to seeing the hyperactive boy, but we're like, think of the daydreamer who seems like they could be looking straight at you, but you ask them something and they're not responding. You can tell they're in their own world. Look for the doodlers. We also look at test scores a lot.
That's really it, right? That is basically the ADHD test. Look for the doodlers. That's all you need, really.
Yeah, right? Or even the ones who get lost in their books, Like, I did that a lot. Teachers didn't complain about me because I was reading. I need to start saying this more to my teachers, but they also need to look at who are the girls who are finishing their tasks super fast.
Yes, good one.
Like, because they don't have the sense of time, so they try to get through it as fast as they can because they don't know what time feels like. That was me. And then they're sitting there and they're doodling or they're reading their books. It's the ones who, like for test scores, they're very inconsistent. So like one day it'll be here, next day it'll be lower, then it might be average. They're never consistent, and it's not just like not consistent with what we know they're capable of. It's like the fun little, you look at their graphs and it's like a fun roller coaster that you do not want to go on.
Yeah, that was sort of how I was too in school. It was like, if it was a multiple choice test or like a one-page quick homework, I would do it immediately. It was easy. But it was the bigger stuff, the book reports, the essays, those are the things that they were always like, Katie really, she starts things and she just loses her focus, and that's where all those comments were, and that's that's where the procrastination starts to come in, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, that's a really good thing about inconsistent grades, and the type of assignments I think really matters too.
Yeah, and handwriting, really bad handwriting.
Yep.
Like, I have yet to find an ADHD girl with like decent handwriting. I would love to see somebody who does, because if they do, please teach me, because I can't. Like,
that
I
was
can't.
one of my big realizations after my diagnosis. I'm still really bitter about it. I've talked about this in the past, how my parents always laughed about how I was left-handed, and then my kindergarten teacher forced me to become right-handed. And then soon thereafter, by the time I was in first grade, they were criticizing my handwriting, and it was always on my report cards, needs to work on her handwriting. And I was like, can you give me a break? Like, I just did it never occur to any of you that this was terrible decision making? And they were always like, yeah, isn't that funny that happened?
No, not funny. Fun fact, I do some things left-handed and
Same.
the majority of things right-handed. Like, because my left eye is my strong eye. And so I shoot pool left-handed. I fight left-handed. Like, I also had a gifted teacher who made us color mandalas, where on the right side we had to color with our right hand. Left side we had to color with the left hand.
Ooh.
And also we couldn't have the same color touching.
I had an art teacher who made us do that, drawing simultaneously on both sides. Interesting, yeah. Okay, so I got us all on a side tangent, but I'm curious. I still want to ask about the with for teachers. Those are some really great answers, and I think that's super helpful. So when when does medication become part of the treatment plan? Because I think a lot of the time medication is also something where the teacher is like, this kid is out of control. We need this medication to kind of put them in a like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like
So I have a fun quote that I like to say. Pills don't teach skills,
right?
but pills help the brain be ready to learn the skills. And that is what I feel like you're trying to describe.
Right. Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, because we do talk about it like it's quieting and helps focus and all of that, but sometimes when you're telling teachers that, like, it's the quiet kids who are reading and daydreaming who might need help as well, like, is the medication, is that also the first option for them as well, I guess is my question.
So in the school system, we technically are not allowed to touch medication in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, usually the extent that I talk medication is asking, are they on medication? So we know, or did they start it? Because it help them see, is there a change? If they're looking for something in particular, are we noticing any differences? But in the school setting, it's not our lane to talk about medication. So it's one of those things we have to tread lightly kind of thing. So we can't really touch.
That totally makes sense. I get that. But in terms of coping skills, right? I mean, you had talked earlier about anxiety coping skills. What are some examples that you would recommend for those kids who on the surface seem like they're doing fine, but we know as adult women we see what's going to happen to them, right? Like, we know that this is just a ball of anxiety that's growing and growing and growing.
Yeah. I think they definitely, it's kind of like, I think of it as, sorry, my brain has all the words going together at once, so I'm like getting them organized. So they're doing well for now, but I know, like, for me personally, and I've heard you say this before on previous episodes, getting a diagnosis was like treatment for me. It helped make sense, and I think that parents need to talk to their kids about it. I think they need to, in developmental, appropriate ways, but they need to be talked with about it. They need to be told to understand, and because most of these times, the kids, especially the girls, they just think, oh, everybody's like this, I just got to keep it inside. They don't know that there's a different way to think and do things. They don't realize that there are other things they can do. Like, we all have that internalized, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough kind of things that I know I felt, especially being gifted. I had so much expectation put on me. Like, I had a parent who wanted me to go to school for engineering. I shot that down like it was a duck in the sky. But it just, I think as they need to be informed so that they know. And as a school counselor, I can actually help with that because I go into the classrooms every month. I do classroom counseling lessons on a variety of topics. Like, I did one for second grade this year on autism with the book Uniquely Wired to help teach kids about autism. There are books like Mrs. Gorski, I think I have the wiggle fidgets. Or it's hard to be a verb. I'm still trying to find some that show the more classic ADHD, like inattentive, but it's a little bit harder. But I still try to use those books to show kids, like, because my kids know me. They know who Miss Touchet is. That I feel bad because I mess up lines. I get lots of hugs. I ain't mad about that. Give me all the hugs. But I still, they know they can come to me. And I've noticed, especially like this school year, with me saying more about, okay, these are the kinds of things to look for in like planning and time sense and emotional regulation or perfectionism. My teachers are coming to me more. They're consulting with me more. They're asking me more questions. So kids who wouldn't have normally ended up on my radar actually ended up on my radar this school year.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean I find even I mean neither of my kids is officially diagnosed yet. The diagnosis process is that's a whole other issue. I'm just trying to get through the days. But you know what I
There.
mean? Like, right? But I still think like my parenting has changed so drastically since with my own knowledge of neurodivergence, right? And my attitude toward parenting my children and what to look for, all of that has changed so much. It feels good. It's, I think for the first time in my life, I can actually say I'm a great parent, and I'm a great parent for my kids, too, which is another thing I never could have said before my diagnosis. I mean, and yeah, I think right, I shout that from the rooftops. I think the diagnosis itself is so incredibly life-changing, and sometimes I get flack for, like, celebrating when people are they say, "Oh, I got diagnosed with ADHD." My response is always like, "Yes, that's amazing, fantastic." And then people are like, "How can you celebrate it and make light of it? ADHD is really serious." And I'm like, "Yes, of course it's serious, but I'm celebrating the diagnosis because the diagnosis. I'm not celebrating ADHD, but I'm celebrating a diagnosis because I feel like that is a window opening in terms of what is possible in your life. It is amazing, and so that's so wonderful that you're able to see how the changes in your relationship with these kids as well. It's so rewarding. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I
Like,
can't even imagine what it's like
like,
to be a school counselor right now. Oh my god.
look, it's fun. It's interesting. I get tired a lot, but I wouldn't change it for the world. Especially like I work with 4-year-olds to 8-year-olds. I got the best tiny humans. Like, straight up, I had them literally I had some second graders trying to barricade themselves against a door the other day because I told them since they're going to third grade, they're getting a different counselor, and they're like, you can't leave. And I'm
Aww.
like, so is it still trying? Yes. But I, people always ask me why I don't have my own kids, and I'm like, I got 300 of them at work.
I get that. So I'm curious, what about your ADHD or ASD? What is it that you love? We've talked about it sort of woven throughout this interview, but
Yeah.
is there anything else that you wanted to add in that you love?
I love that it helps me help my tiny humans more. I mean, they technically started this journey, like of me actually delving deep into it, because it is me missing something for work and my husband pointing it out once again. But I love that it helps me help them. I love that it helps me advocate for them and brings more awareness. And I also like that it helps me, like I tell people all the time when I give presentations about school counseling, I'm like, look, you can do a lot of these things, but I understand that I run at it like a higher level than most people when it comes to this. It's like, I am autistic who has a special interest in her job. I was like, so I go to conferences and I'm energized, while most people are just straight tired after them. And I'm like, yes, give me more. Like, oh, this is a training. I've got like 6 trainings currently queued that I need to go through. And it helps me gain more information, and it helps me understand myself better and understand my tiny humans better. And ultimately, it helps me love them more and create the safe place they need and help others create that safe place they need.
Oh my, that is so beautiful. And also, too, I mean, I love recognizing how I learn best, right? And that was another thing too that's been really great for me since my diagnosis, because I just did not do well in school, and I certainly didn't do well in university, and always felt like I struggled in the classroom and struggled in lecture halls and all of that, and I just thought I was a bad student and therefore I was not smart, and I kept that with me for years and years and years, and always felt like I was a fraud. And now it's really like understanding that when you are interested in something and learning on your own terms, like it's, you're unstoppable. And that's the thing that I finally was able to recognize in myself, where I'm like, oh my God, like like, I just learned in totally non-traditional ways, and that's amazing, and something to be really proud of. So yeah, if you can teach that to children too, right? Realize that, like, if this is not the best, if this is not working out for you, it's not your fault. You just need to find something
Yeah.
that will. No.
I actually found I use a lot of group curriculums, and one of them is called Mega Minds, and it's specifically for like gifted and talented like kids. And the first thing we do is a whiz quiz on multiple intelligences. So we figure out like what are their, like, of the Gardner's like 7 intelligences. It's like, all right, what are your top 3? I like created them a little handout, and I let their teachers know. So like, I'm the biggest proponent of like, figure out what they like and incorporate it. If they like Mario, have them count Mario toys or Mario coins. There we go. Like, for me, it's Harry Potter. Let's talk about some Quidditch. Like, oh, is it Paw Patrol? We're about to learn some names of some Paw Patrol people. So when you do those things, that, like you said, it's like they can do anything, and I've gotten to like watch that happen in action. So I love it. It makes me so happy.
Aw, God, I keep feeling like I should thank you for your service. That's what I feel like when I meet teachers and the school and staff. I'm like, thank you for your service, because it's like such, you're in the trenches right now. It really is like, it's just such, so much insanity right now. So I want to ask you if you would rename ADHD to something a little less confusing or problematic. What would you call it?
So I actually got Alicia, my co-counselor, in on this because I was like, I'm drawing a blank right now. Like, I don't know. And she gave me the best one. It was attention competition
Ooh.
disorder. Because I guess she was talking to one of her friends, and she was like, I'm not ADHD, and Layla focuses better than I do. So it's not that she can't focus, it's just she wants to focus on everything.
Yeah, right. I know. Yeah, we talk about that all the time. It's the regulation, and that I use the analogy of the buzzers, the restaurant buzzers. That they're all sitting on a table, and you're like, what do I do first? And you try to do something, and all the buzzers are still going off. I'm like, yeah, that's what it feels like to try to try to prioritize tasks in my brain.
It really does. Yeah. So attention competition disorder.
I like that. Thank you. Sorry, what was her name again? Alicia?
Alicia.
Alicia. Thanks, Alicia.
Right?
Oh, well, that's awesome. It sounds wonderful. And now, are you doing any other advocacy? I know beyond just the classroom right now, or do you have any plan? You're kind of looking stuff
Like,
up?
I'm waiting on my program proposal. I did earn elementary school counselor of my school district, so I plan on using that to my advantage. And that's to show people like ADHD and autism doesn't have to be a scary thing, and we can still be successful. Because I'm just like, I'm getting a PhD. Like, don't let it scare you.
Right?
Uh, I I interact with my local university a lot. They're my alma mater, and I'm always in contact with some of the professors there. I mean, that's how I ended up at their clinic giving a presentation. Uh, so it's kind of like one of those people reach out to me. I have my Instagram, the neurodivergent counselor, and I do a lot of like disseminating there. But like official, not really, not yet. I'm
You're
trying,
doing
but
plenty,
it's
don't
to find the ways.
worry. I mean, like I said, I always say if I can change if I can help one person, it feels like it will have all been worth it. So it sounds like you are helping so many kids just by changing the narrative, right? And changing um, some of the stereotypes and misinformation that is existing in schools. And so thank you for your service. Thank you for
I
everything
love
you're
it.
doing. Right? I know. I'm like, it's so wonderful to hear, and congratulations on the accolades too. It's so that you're actually being recognized for some of this stuff too, which is exciting. So I think
Thank you.
that'll get some attention too. So congratulations and thank you. And thank you for reaching out to me. This was wonderful. I was so excited to interview you, and I know your story will be very inspiring for many, and I think very helpful for teachers and also parents. And I think anybody who is questioning, is this ADHD? Is this autism? As a lot of us are, sort of what is this neurodivergent spectrum? And I feel like you really helped to articulate a lot of that. So thank you for that too.
Thank you for letting me come on. And if you ever have any other questions, I love answering them.
Awesome.